Welcome to Coffee with Kupke, a production of St. Paul Inside the Walls. Here on Coffee with Kupke, we grab a cup of coffee, at least we're claiming this is coffee. We sit with Monsignor Raymond Kupke, the pastor of St. Anthony's in Hawthorne, professor at Immaculate Conception Seminary, diocesan archivist. We sit with Monsignor Kupke to delve into the history of Catholicism in the Diocese of Paterson. My name is Father Paul Manning. I am the vicar for Evangelization for the Diocese of Paterson. And here I am with Monsignor Kupke. So grab your cup of coffee and let's jump right in. I'm going to take a sip. In our last episode, we had just begun to talk about
Bishop McLaughlin into the city.
Yeah, that's it. That's right. We had the parade, and so you talked about the clergy being less than happy, and then being somewhat surprised at the pastoral zeal of McLaughlin, and you mentioned that although he was very imposing and could be intimidating, that he had a soft side, and as evidence, you spoke about Vera Mlin, his secretary, saying that he actually wept at the thought of the young men who had to go into World War II.
Yeah.
So you interviewed her?
I worked with her.
Okay.
We were in the chancery together. McLaughlin, physically very imposing. He was a big man. If you've ever met Cardinal Tobin,
yes,
McLaughlin looked like that.
Yeah.
He was that tall,
yeah,
and that broad.
Right.
So, you can see it in some pictures. When he wears a coat, it comes up to his knees because he's so big. But so he had the voice that went along with that. He was quite the
force to be reckoned with. Yeah.
Yeah. His favorite comment when somebody would critique anything he did, which I don't know what would possess any of them to do that, given what I've heard about him. His retort would be, "I have not been given the Holy Spirit in vain."
Yes.
And how do you
answer that?
How do you answer that exactly?
So Vera obviously would have known him well. And
Vera Mlin is worth a chapter all by herself, really.
Well, I expected we would talk about her.
But she was a young girl. She was barely 20. And they were looking, they had to start from scratch. Basically, the diocese was announced in December of 37. They didn't open the chancery office until April
in the
38.
stable, in the former stable.
In the former stable. So, they had a couple of months there to, A, form a committee to organize the installation, B, renovate the cathedral slightly to accommodate a bishop's throne, and then C, try and organize a chancery office. So basically, Vera was a graduate of St. Joseph's High School. They had an additional...
like a business school.
Right.
Yeah.
So she was a graduate of that. She was recommended by one of the nuns there, and she was hired.
At the age of 20.
She was about 20 years old,
Yeah.
And for much of the time, in the beginning, she was like the only one in the chance. She was the only full-time employee. None of the priests were. And I think they had a part-time secretary for the school office and a part-time secretary for Catholic Charities. And that was it. That was a whole operation. So she, just by virtue of being the only one there, she was a major player almost from the beginning. And I don't think I know she didn't realize that this was going to be a lifetime appointment.
So she served how many of our bishops? 6 of them?
6 of them, right.
And never married?
She never married, right. when Bishop Rodimer, was named bishop, she recollected from her own memory when Rodimer came in to visit McLaughlin as a 15-year-old high school student to sign up to study for the diocese. Wow. So that was the span of her.
Yes, yeah.
So she knew everything about everybody.
And when McLaughlin's health began to fail, I don't know if this is in the actual text or in the footnote. You mentioned that Vera Mlin served him faithfully. At one point, I think they commandeered her living room as an office. Do you remember this? For Father Lewis, I think?
This is up in Walpack.
Okay.
Yeah.
So tell us.
So McLaughlin liked to go to Walpack every summer. The diocese owned a little place there. And it was basically a shack, but
yeah,
he loved it. It reminded him of Austria.
Yes.
It was so remote that they had to get telephone service from the other side of the river.
Oh,
run
the Pennsylvania side.
From Pennsylvania to this house.
And he was recommended for health reasons to spend time there.
Right. So he would spend the whole summer up there. And Vera would go up. There was no way to get there. So Vera would go up by a milk train up to Branchville. And then somebody would pick her up and drive her back to the house in Walpack. It was very, very rustic, and very often they had to use her bedroom as
or in a living room or whatever.
Yeah, it was a very complicated situation.
You said that
McLaughlin got annoyed because one time Brestol was up there.
Monsignor Brestol, one of the first priests of the diocese.
Right.
Yeah.
And he and I guess Bill King went down to meet the train. I mean, basically Vera was traveling in the caboose.
Yeah.
Which from her rendition of it, her father was not happy with this arrangement, but then McLaughlin got upset because he realized that Brestol was very young himself, and she were sitting in the back seat of the car.
Oh,
it was not.
Wow,
this was not to be.
Yeah, custody of the eyes and custody of presence and proximity. Yeah. A couple interesting things. You say that McLaughlin would drive through Sussex checking names on mailboxes.
Yes.
And if
he enjoyed the pastoral part of the job very much. So he loved driving on Sundays. Like he would go out.
That was a big thing even when I was a kid, a drive on a Sunday.
Right.
Yeah.
But he would go out looking for like sites for new churches.
Oh.
But he would also, especially in Sussex County, he would check out mailboxes, and if they had a name that he decided should be a Catholic name, like Zabriskie, for example.
Yeah.
He would then notify the pastor that there were possibly fallen away Catholics that should be reclaimed by the pastor on a very, very soon to happen pastoral visit. This is at a time when there were only 2 priests in Sussex County.
Yeah, yeah. You also mentioned that at one point he was passing Bell Labs in Whippany and thought it was a POW camp.
Yes.
This would have been in the 40s?
Right, this would have been during the war. And he saw the fence around it, the chain link fence, and just without asking anybody, he just presumed that this was a prisoner of war camp. So the startled Pastor Whippany then got several pages of detailed instructions on the pastoral care of prisoners of war.
And he's scratching his head saying, what?
What is it?
Okay. So when the diocese is formed, the clergy of the Archdiocese of Newark get split, and some guys find themselves in the Diocese of Paterson very unexpectedly. You said some were assigned within 24 hours.
It says something about how unprepared they were for this, that this did not tip them off. Like
all of a sudden people are being moved?
Right, the day before, Archbishop Walsh moved like 6 people.
In December.
In the middle of December 9th,
Yeah.
And this did not incite a rumor that there was something afoot.
And was Walsh saying, I don't want to lose this guy. Let me bring him back, and this guy can go?
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. A little bit of that.
Yeah.
There was one in particular, the pastor of Assumption in Morristown.
Got moved?
Well, no. Walsh called him up and said, he offered him, I forget what parish in the archdiocese, and said, you have to say yes right now or no. No questions asked. Do you want it or not? And he said no.
Who was it?
Ellard, the pastor of Morristown.
Of Bailey Ellard fame.
Right.
Yeah.
So he wound up finding out the next day that he was
I wonder if he was
in a new diocese.
Yeah. So at the time that the diocese was formed, the youngest priest was Dennis Hayes, with whom I lived in Rockaway near the end of his life. It's hard to believe that I knew
he was only a priest at that point for 6 months.
Yes.
He'd been ordained in June, and 5.5 months later, and he was assigned, to Sacred Heart in Clifton. So based on that, he became the youngest priest of the new diocese.
And in his 80s, I think he was well into his 80s when I knew him, he still spoke about his beloved Bayonne all the time.
Right.
And the oldest priest at that point was Cornelius Clifford.
Yeah. It did not last very long after that.
Yeah. So I wanted to mention it. So McLaughlin, it seems, had this knack for developing talent among his priests.
Well, their initial reaction was not happy.
Right.
Because at that point, the traditional clerical route in Newark was they sent you out to the boondocks, Netcong, Newton, Franklin.
Yeah.
You started out there as a pastor, then you worked your way back
into the
city where most of them were from.
Yes. Yeah.
So now that path was cut off, and they suddenly realized we're going to be stuck out here in the boondocks of Boonton, Parsippany for the rest of our lives. But that changed almost immediately. I mean, it didn't take long because, first of all, it more than halved the waiting period to become a pastor.
Okay.
So in Newark, sometimes it would be 25, 26, 27 years before you would get your own parish.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, the guys in the new diocese
10 or 12 years.
10, 12 years.
Yeah.
So that, and not only that, but he was establishing new parishes. So there was the excitement of doing your own thing, going out there and establishing something and building it and all of that, excitement. In addition to that, the new diocese had to be staffed in terms of organization.
Departments and offices. Yeah. So their guys are getting important jobs.
Just about everybody got a job, I mean, when you get down to there's the obvious, the big jobs, the vicar general, the chancellor, but there's also, the board of overseers of this and the diocesan director of the Legion of Decency. Everybody got a job, basically.
Well, on 229, you have a list of the appointments that McLaughlin made to fill out the diocesan structure, and I thought the list was interesting in the way that it indicates what might have been the priorities at that time.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to ask you about if you wanted to comment on any of these. Top of the list was theological censor, which would be the guy who has to make sure what?
that books being printed in the diocese have theological correctness.
And are we publishing that many books?
Yes, we did back then.
How come?
Because Paterson, and we may get into this
Down the road.
morning yet, Paterson was the seat of St. Anthony's Guilds,
Okay.
which the Franciscans started,
Okay.
and it became a major publishing house.
And
If you look at early copies of the New American Bible, the imprimatur is from Paterson, because they were the first publisher.
Wow. Then we have moderator of clergy conferences.
Yes.
So we're having clergy conferences often enough that we need a moderator?
Well, we still have this.
Father Richard Bay.
Yes, the
Priestly ministry
yeah,
formation,
administrative
whatever.
priests,
Yeah.
Yeah, this is one of the early names of that. But yes, they were regular, maybe 3 times, 4 times a year. There were talks given, and everybody had to come. And
Kind of mandatory.
it was like ongoing formation, ongoing education.
Then we have superintendent of schools, which we'd imagine. Moderator of the Commission for Sacred Music.
Yes. This is, again,
Is this coming out of the liturgical movement and we're concerned about
coming
music?
out of the liturgical movement.
Wow.
And there had been some things written at that point about the development of liturgical music in the early 20th century. Pius X had issued a decree about Gregorian chant, and so yeah.
And interestingly, I didn't realize this until now, the moderator was Father Emil Souchon,
Of Rockaway, yes.
who, again, we knew in our lifetime.
Right.
And was he a music guy?
He was famous for sometimes, I mean, you couldn't pull this off today, I don't think, but God knows. He was not unheard of to be the celebrant and organist at the same mass.
Oh my goodness! Wow, that would be that would take some maneuvering.
Well, he would run up after communion and
Play a hymn.
play a little.
Wow.
Yeah, he was an accomplished organist.
Okay. Director, Rural Life. Sussex County. We can figure that out. Society for the Propagation of the Faith, Apostleship of Prayer, Holy Name Societies, cemeteries. These all make sense. Catholic Charities. Director, Priests Eucharistic League.
Yeah, we still have that.
We do?
Yeah, it was Christolella until just a few years ago. I don't know that that's been active for decades, but on paper, we still
I'm
have
just
that.
curious, in this time of Eucharistic revival, what was this? Was it priests committing themselves to?
Right, this is the origin of Emmanuel magazine.
Oh, yeah, by the Sulpicians.
This was early 20th century.
Emmanuel was the priest of this Blessed Sacrament. Yeah.
But also the Nocturnal Adoration Society.
Okay.
So there was an early Eucharistic movement in the 20th century.
And then you have...
There actually were handbooks printed and sent out so that if you were traveling on the night when your group made their nocturnal adoration, their monthly, you could go somewhere else and do it.
Okay. And then the Mount Carmel Guild.
Mount Carmel Guild in Paterson, in Newark, was basically the name that was given to Catholic charities, social services.
Yes.
And so that name, and it had also been used in Trenton. So that name was applied. And ultimately, this is the origins of Straight and Narrow. So
this today would be Catholic Charities.
More social services. Catholic Charities then, most of what we call Catholic Charities today, yes, would be, Catholic Charities back then, one of its biggest operations was child adoption.
Okay, yeah.
Something that we don't do at all anymore. But
yeah.
At the time,
it was big.
There was a whole agency that assisted people with that.
In 1943, Bishop McLaughlin convenes a diocesan synod.
the first of the two diocesan synods
When was the second one?
in the 70s.
Okay, so I found this very interesting, given the fact that we're involved in a synodal process. So a diocesan synod was convened. It seems like to update the canonical functioning of the diocese.
Yeah, it was an opportunity. It was a one-day meeting.
Okay.
There had been several committees that met prior to that.
Yeah, the current synod, there's lots and lots of meetings. It's more than one day.
Well, there were committee meetings and everything, and then everybody came together for one day, one afternoon, and approved, by vote, all these synodal statutes. We still have the book.
Wow,
in the
I'd love to
archives.
see that.
So basically, it was creating for want of a better word, the Paterson approach to canon law.
Yeah, the local application.
Adaptation and application.
Yeah. And it sounded like this was attended by priests.
Yes, only
So
priests.
not a lot of lay involvement in this
No.
time. And that's in contrast to today, in which the case has been made that diocesan priests were not represented in the synod. So I just thought that was an interesting antithetical situation. So McLaughlin is showing signs of illness. You have a photo here, 1943. Can you say anything about I don't know, this obviously would have been a cross for a bishop who was as enthusiastic as he was. What was this like? Was he in decline? Were other people stepping in for him? What was happening?
Basically, nobody had a cardiologist back then.
Okay.
So, as his heart was beginning to have issues, it meant slowdown for him. And sometimes whole periods of slowdown. So very often, the auxiliary bishops of Newark would be asked to step in for a confirmation, but there were not as many of them. There were not as many parishes.
Yeah.
and not every parish had confirmation every year. So it was not quite as, and administratively, he could still operate out of the bedroom. This became an issue, though, toward the end of his career. The last couple of months, he was almost unseen. It was kind of like Woodrow Wilson at the end of and his secretary and vice chancellor, Father William King, who, it was an odd situation. They had sent King to get the doctorate. As soon as they could afford enough manpower, they sent King to study and get a doctorate.
In canon law?
In canon law.
Yeah.
So he comes back, and he's the only one who's got one. So he's working under people who do not have as much training as he had. They have the power, they have the experience, they have the title. So King's personality was a type that didn't mesh into this situation very easily. So it became something of a problem toward the very end, the last few months of McLaughlin's life, because basically King was interpreting the bishop to the whole diocese without them actually seeing him.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
The night that McLaughlin died, the first act of the diocesan administrator was to remove King.
Well, we're going to leave it there. That's interesting, and maybe we'll pick that up as we begin our next episode. Let's leave it there. I want all of you who are listening or watching to make sure that you keep an eye out or an ear out for the next episode of Coffee with Kupke. In order to stay on top of new releases, make sure you follow or subscribe wherever you're listening. And if you are on YouTube, please do drop a like and hit the bell for notifications. While you're at it, make sure to check out the other shows produced by the diocese. Those shows are Beyond the Beacon, hosted by Bishop Kevin Sweeney and Jay Agnish, our Director of Communications, and the Paul Street Journal, hosted by Brian Hansberger and Freddie Garcia. I want to give a special thanks to Joe Ginexi, our sound and visual engineer, Caitlin Ferrari, who's involved in pre- and post-production, and Freddie Garcia, who's helping out with this podcast in addition to doing his own. With all that said, I just want to thank you for joining us in Coffee with Kupke. Keep making Catholic history in the Diocese of Paterson.